This is When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, where I look at the films that shaped the MTV generation. Today I'm analyzing The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, a sci-fi cult film from 1984 that can be summed up in one word: gonzo. Buckaroo Banzai was directed by W.D. Richter, no relation, who was the screenwriter of the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers and of John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China. The only other film Richter has directed is 1991's Late for Dinner. Buckaroo Banzai was written by Earl Mac Rauch, who wrote the 1989 John Belushi biopic Wired, as well as the 1977 Martin Scorsese musical New York, New York. Like many cult films, Buckaroo Banzai underwent a tortured path on its way into theaters. After languishing at MGM, the script was eventually picked up by Fox, which did its very best to damp down its weirdness and turn it into a straightforward action-adventure romp. Despite the very best efforts of Fox, the film still turned out magnificently weird. It slithered into a handful of theaters in August of 1984 and bombed, making back about half of its $12 million budget, but has gone on to become a beloved cult favorite. We open with a big chunk of text plastered on the screen Star Wars style that explains that Buckaroo Banzai is a half-Japanese neurosurgeon, martial artist, and particle physicist, as well as the leader of a band of hard-rocking scientists known as the Hong Kong Cavaliers. Already, you should have a pretty good idea as to whether this is a film that's going to appeal to you. Buckaroo Banzai is scheduled to take his jet car on an attempt to traverse the interdimensional barrier. The experiment is delayed because Banzai is performing some emergency brain surgery. He shows up at the test site at the last minute, where the Hong Kong Cavaliers are already assembled. Buckaroo Banzai is played by Peter Weller, best known as the title character in another much-loved sci-fi film from the 80s, RoboCop. The Hong Kong Cavaliers include Perfect Tommy, played by Lewis Smith, Rawhide, played by Clancy Brown, whom you probably know as the Kurgan in Russell Mulcahy's Highlander. He's also Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob SquarePants. And Reno, Nevada, played by character actor Pepe Serna, best known for Scarface. Banzai takes off in his jet car, speeding across the desert and driving straight into the side of a mountain, where he uses his special oscillation overthruster to successfully travel all the way across the interdimensional barrier and emerge safely out the other side. He finds what seems to be a strange alien life form clinging to the underside of his jet car. At a hospital for the criminal insane, a patient named Dr. Emilio Lizardo watches a news interview with the Hong Kong Cavaliers in growing frustration. Lizardo is played by John Lithgow, known for many films and TV shows, including Footloose and Third Rock from the Sun. He recently played Winston Churchill on the acclaimed historical drama The Crown. We learn from the news report that Lizardo and Professor Hikita invented the oscillation overthruster together at Princeton in 1938. We flash back to a laboratory in 1938, where a younger Lizardo tests the oscillation overthruster prematurely and ends up half stuck in another dimension where he's attacked by interdimensional creatures. He emerges from the dimension howling mad and, as we'll soon discover, possessed by one of the creatures. Back in the present, Lizardo works on his own overthruster in his hospital room. The Hong Kong Cavaliers, who are musicians as well as scientists, perform at a nightclub in New Jersey. Banzai stops the set because he has a feeling someone in the audience is unhappy. He spots a sobbing young woman sitting by herself and tries to cheer her up. The woman, who introduces herself as Penny Pretty, is played by Ellen Barkin, who was best known at the time for Barry Levinson's ensemble piece Diner. She went on to star as a series of femme fatales in neo-noirs such as 1986's The Big Easy and 1989's Sea of Love. Penny explains that she's broke, drunk, and miserable, so Banzai sits down at the piano and tries to cheer her up by crooning a sensitive rendition of Since I Don't Have You, the 1958 doo-wop hit by the Skyliners. His performance is interrupted when Penny tries to kill herself, misfires, and is dragged off by security. From the asylum, Lizardo places a call to a John Big Boutte at a company called Yo-Yo-Dine. Yo-Yo-Dine is an homage to Thomas Pynchon's novel The Crying of Lot 49, which prominently features a defense contractor named Yo-Yo-Dine. Lizardo identifies himself to the answering party as John Wharfen. When an orderly, played by Jonathan Banks of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, tries to stop him, Lizardo breaks his neck. On the phone, Lizardo tells Big Boutte to prepare for his return because Banzai has opened a window to their dimension. On Buckaroo Banzai's tour bus, Rawhide alerts Banzai to Lizardo's escape from the asylum, while Reno and Perfect Tommy discuss how much Penny resembles Banzai's dead wife. In New Brunswick, Banzai meets up with a Stetson-wearing neurosurgeon who'd assisted him with the surgery in the opening sequence. This is Dr. Sidney Zweibel, who assumes the name New Jersey and joins the Hong Kong Cavaliers, and who is played by national treasure Jeff Goldblum. At this stage in his career, Goldblum was working steadily as a character actor, though he'd transitioned to a leading man in David Cronenberg's 1986 remake of The Fly and 1988's Earth Girls Are Easy, before Jurassic Park turned him into a pop culture icon in 1993. Banzai visits Penny in a jail cell and discovers she's his dead wife's long-lost twin. He impulsively bails her out and takes her along for the ride. At a press conference featuring the Secretary of Defense, played by Tough Turf's Matt Clark, and Dr. Hikita, played by Quincy ME's Robert Ito, Banzai talks about the discovery of life forms from other dimensions that exist on the same plane as Earth. In attendance at the press conference are two shifty-looking men played by two of our greatest character actors, John O'Connor, played by the late Vincent Schiavelli, and John Gomez, played by Dan Hedaya. Banzai takes an emergency call from someone claiming to be the US president. The call turns out to be from some interdimensional creatures known as lectroids, who are hovering above the Earth in a star-shaped spaceship. They stun Banzai through the phone lines with an electric charge, which gives him a spark of knowledge that leads him to scribble a formula on the palm of his hand. The formula is an electrochemical message that gives him the ability to see John O'Connor and John Gomez in their lectroid form. John Big Boutte, the lectroid whom Dr. Lizardo contacted earlier, kidnaps Professor Hikita from the middle of the press conference. Big Boutte, whose name will be constantly mispronounced throughout the film as Big Booty, is played by Christopher Lloyd, then best known as the Reverend Jim on the sitcom Taxi. He'd soon become famous for playing Doc Brown in the Back to the Future franchise. Banzai steals a motorcycle and gives chase to O'Connor, Gomez, and Big Boutte, who are driving a van emblazoned with the Yo-Yo-Dine logo. A pair of hunters shoot down a thermal pod launched by the lectroid spaceship. An injured lectroid in human form staggers out of it, carrying a Buckaroo Banzai comic book. He hits his head on a rock and dies, then turns back into his alien form. As the hunters examine his corpse, another lectroid in human form slips out of the pod and sneaks off unseen. Big Boutte, O'Connor, and Gomez arrive and question the hunters about the pod. While they're distracted, Banzai rescues Dr. Hikita from the back of their van. Perfect John summons the Blue Blaze Irregulars, who are civilians who are trained and ready to help Buckaroo Banzai at a moment's notice. The Hong Kong Cavaliers and Penny assemble at a secret bunker maintained by a woman named Mrs. Johnson, played by Laura Harrington. Big Boutte, O'Connor, and Gomez attempt to break into the pod, where an injured lectroid hides inside. The lectroids in the spaceship radio him with orders to self-destruct, and the pod explodes. Big Boutte, O'Connor, and Gomez spot and chase Banzai, who is rescued by a helicopter piloted by the Blue Blaze Irregulars. The lectroid who escaped from the pod shows up at the bunker in his human form and identifies himself as John Parker, who is played by Cagney and Lacey's Carl Lumbly. He tries to deliver a pink cake box to Banzai. He's stonewalled by a Blue Blaze Irregular named Pinky Carruthers, who takes the box but refuses to let him into the bunker. Pinky Carruthers is played by musician Billy Vera, whose band Billy Vera and the Beaters had a big hit in 1986 with At This Moment, a song recorded in 1981 which shot up the charts 5 years later when it was used on a pivotal episode of the NBC sitcom Family Ties. At the bunker, the Hong Kong Cavaliers hack into Yo-Yo-Dine's employment records and find the human identities of all the lectroids hiding on Earth, all of whom are named John and all of whom applied for Social Security cards in Grover's Mill, New Jersey on Halloween in 1938. New Jersey identifies this as the day of Orson Welles' radio broadcast of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, which was about Martians landing in Grover's Mill. When Banzai arrives at the bunker, the Hong Kong Cavaliers brief him on their discovery. On Halloween in 1938, a bunch of red lectroids from Planet 10 were able to break through the 8th dimension and arrive on Earth thanks to Dr. Lizardo's failed experiment with the oscillation overthruster. Orson Welles attempted to warn humanity about the invasion through his radio broadcast, but the red lectroids later hypnotized him into thinking it was all a hoax. Big Boutte, O'Connor, and Gomez break into the bunker while John Parker secretly trails them. Parker is caught by a pair of Blue Blaze Irregulars. The cake box from John Parker contains a holographic message from John Endall, leader of the peaceful black lectroids, who warns Banzai of great danger from the evil red lectroids who are led by John Worfen, who took over Dr. Lizardo's body back in 1938. John Endall is played by the Omega Man's Rosalind Cash. All the lectroids come from Planet 10. The evil red lectroids were overthrown and imprisoned by the peaceful black lectroids until Dr. Lizardo's experiment freed some of them in 1938 and allowed them to come to Earth, where they've been holed up in the Yo-Yo-Dine plant, working on a spaceship to travel back to their dimension. Worfen, aka Dr. Lizardo, plans to steal Banzai's overthruster to make the spaceship operational. John Emdahl warns Banzai that to prevent that eventuality, the black lectroids will trigger a nuclear war between the US and the USSR, thus destroying humanity. The red lectroids search the bunker for the overthruster. They mortally wound Rawhide and kidnap Penny, who, unbeknownst to the red lectroids, is secretly in possession of the overthruster. US President Widmark, accompanied by his Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor, takes a call from Banzai, who warns him of the Black Lectroid's plan. President Widmark is played by Ronald Lacey, best known as the Nazi who got the headpiece of the Staff of Ra burned into his palm in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The National Security Advisor is played by Yakov Smirnov, who emigrated to the US from the Soviet Union in 1977 and became a popular author and stand-up comedian. John Worfen, aka Dr. Lizardo, calls Banzai and tells him he'll trade Penny for the Overthruster. Buckaroo Banzai, John Parker, and the Hong Kong Cavaliers make plans to invade Yoyodyne to rescue Penny, destroy the Red Lectroids, and save the Earth from World War III. Banzai surrenders himself to Worfen, who tortures him for information about the Overthruster. Meanwhile, with the aid of the Secretary of Defense, the Hong Kong Cavaliers and John Parker sneak into Yoyodyne. A big fight breaks out. Worfen/Lizardo installs the flawed Overthruster he built in the Hospital for the Criminally Insane into his spaceship and blasts off, with Banzai and John Parker secretly on board. Worfen's ship fails to make the dimensional jump, and Banzai and John Parker escape in a pod and destroy the ship and all the Red Lectroids on it. As John Parker heads off in the pod, Banzai parachutes to safety. On the Hong Kong Cavaliers tour bus, Banzai discovers that, despite New Jersey's attempts to save her, Penny has died from injuries sustained from being tortured by the Red Lectroids. Banzai kisses her corpse and transfers a shock of life into her, courtesy of the powers given to him by the Black Lectroids. And we get a delightful end credit sequence in which Buckaroo Banzai and the Hong Kong Cavaliers, plus John Parker and Penny and the Blue Blazer regulars, stretch through the dry Los Angeles River basin. Per the end credits, Buckaroo Banzai and the Hong Kong Cavaliers were set to return in a sequel, Buckaroo Banzai vs. the World Crime League. And that did not happen, because the film was a big box office dud. There have been various attempts over the last few decades to revisit Buckaroo Banzai's strange universe. Fox tried to launch a television series in the late 90s titled Buckaroo Banzai: Ancient Secrets and New Mysteries, but it never came together. Writer-director Kevin Smith also had plans to make a Buckaroo Banzai television series for Amazon Studios in 2016, but that too fell apart. Revisiting the Buckaroo Banzai universe has proved to be hopelessly complicated because the intellectual property has been through so many hands that, despite lawsuits and countersuits, no one can figure out exactly who owns the character of Buckaroo Banzai. Earlier I described the film as gonzo, and I think that's exactly the right word for it. The adventures of Buckaroo Banzai across the 8th dimension is bizarre and crazy and brimming with a delightfully chaotic energy. The 80s saw the release of a number of films where, when you describe the plot to someone, it's hard to tell if it sounds stupid or awesome. Earth Girls Are Easy, Big Trouble in Little China, Highlander, and Howard the Duck all fit into this category, along with Buckaroo Banzai. Buckaroo Banzai is a joyous and chaotic celebration of geek culture, years before geek culture was seen by the mainstream as something worth celebrating. Making smart characters cool seemed like a radical idea in 1984, and part of this film's enduring impact is how it introduced Gen X viewers to the concept of a hero who possessed qualities that would ordinarily lead to him being labeled a nerd, such as a genius-level understanding of particle physics, and yet still be the coolest guy in the room. I'm going to say something that may seem like blasphemy, but please bear with me. Most of you are probably familiar with the concept of a Mary Sue. Mary Sues began in fanfiction, but the definition's been expanded to include all forms of media, and it describes a character who is simply too good to be true, who possesses only positive traits in a way that makes them utterly unrealistic. The character of Buckaroo Banzai is a Mary Sue, and that's totally cool. Calling someone a Mary Sue can be considered fighting words, but I do mean it positively here. Buckaroo Banzai is an utterly unrealistic character who possesses only positive traits, and that's part of his charm. If Banzai has flaws, we don't see any sign of them. He's a comic book hero. Literally, it's referenced throughout the film that there is a Buckaroo Banzai comic book. And he's a rock star and a brilliant scientist and a neurosurgeon. Whenever he walks into a room, everyone stares at him in admiration. He makes no mistakes or wrong moves throughout the film. He never behaves in anything other than a heroic manner. And it's all done very tongue-in-cheek, but nonetheless, we the viewers are supposed to admire Buckaroo Banzai. The plot of Buckaroo Banzai often drifts perilously close to being nonsensical, and this film could have easily gone terribly, horribly wrong. But it works, at least for the most part, and that's because it's got an easygoing vibe that lets viewers know not to take anything too seriously, and because it's populated by enough cool characters and has enough interesting things happening in it to keep the plot going with an almost propulsive energy. Even if you're not entirely clear on what's happening in the film at any given time, it's still a blast hanging out with Buckaroo Banzai and the Hong Kong Cavaliers. Next time, it's another weird one. I am going to look at Duran Duran's 1984 sci-fi themed concert film Arena, An Absurd Notion, which was filmed by Highlander's Russell Mulcahy. It's a strange beast, and I love it dearly. That's next time, so until then, thank you very much for joining me and enjoy your week.